Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. My name is Bobby Hawk, and in a couple of moments, you'll be able to watch Opher Rom and myself talk about the history of Israel or some of the things about Israel that we find interesting. Now, all of our podcasts, the entire first season, 12 episodes, were recorded in June of 2023. The goal was to release one each month, July of 2023 through June of 2024, with the possibility of a season 2. We've released 4 episodes so far, and as I record this, it is now October of 2023. Israel is unfortunately in war, and there's unprecedented conflict in the region. So we're going to release episodes 5 through 12 over an 8-day period here in October. Again, as you listen to these, you'll probably notice a couple of things. They were meant to be released monthly, so you may hear us refer to that. We also refer to trips to the Holy Lands and the safety that we've experienced in the past. However, that's changed. I personally have had to cancel 3 trips over the next several months because of the conflict that's taking place in Israel. So I'm going to ask you to consider that as you listen or watch the podcast. Know that those were pre-recorded in June and understand that we're releasing all 8 episodes that are remaining now. So whether you're watching episode 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, they'll all be shared during this month of October as you learn more about the history of Israel, the conflict that's created for generations now, for thousands of years. It may help you even understand what's currently going on there. And also, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to pray. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for those who have lost loved ones, who are experiencing the devastation of their country, and pray that peace throughout that region would come quickly. In the meantime, I hope this is informational for you. I hope it's helpful as you learn more about an overview of Israel with Opher Rom. Now here we go. Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds, a podcast where we went and searched and found the most incredible guide in Israel. And while he wasn't available, Opher was.
Thank you.
No, Opher is the best, hands down guide in Israel. So good, we named our podcast after him. Also, with a little bit of play on words here, because Israel has overcome the odds. And so we're actually in season 1. We say season 1 as if there will be a season 2.
We're hopeful.
We're hopeful,
yes.
And I guess it's up to you and I to decide, So we'll decide. But we hope there's a season 2. But in season 1, so far we've been doing an Opher view of Israel, and we'll continue here in a few moments. We're now to right around the 7th century AD, so we are moving ahead. As here we are in February, which is hard to believe. We're already in episode 8.
Amazing.
But I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the CHLS, the Center for Holy Land Studies, or thechls.org. Incredible group at taking people to Israel. So whether you're interested in taking a group or just joining a group that they have going, great people. They do all the hard work for you on the back end, so you get to go enjoy the experience with a guide like Opher. And so I take my groups through there. We love it. That's how Opher and I met, and it's actually where this idea came from, because Opher does what we call bus talks. So you go see sites. Between sites, you got to get there. And on the way, you get incredible information about the land, history, geography, culture. And one of the things is kind of an overview or an Opher view of Israel. So we're going to jump in. Opher, I think we're 7th century, right? We just kind of concluded. We talked about Constantine, his mom Helen. They built these amazing churches. They commemorate things. But now we're getting ready to enter the period of Islam coming into the land.
Right. So we already started talking a little bit in the earlier podcasts about Islam. Islam stems, as far as they're concerned, from Abraham. Abraham had his first 2 children, and the first one is Ishmael. And if we go down the line from Abraham to Ishmael, we eventually reach Muhammad. Islam says that Muhammad is the descendant of Ishmael, the descendant of Abraham. And Islam is going to rise in the 7th century with Muhammad. Muhammad receives the Quran. This is what the Muslims consider not just the last update of the Word of God. They accept the Jewish text. They accept the Christian text. These are the words of God. But now there's an updated version, and this is the Quran. So not only is this the last, it's also the final. And as far as Islam is concerned, this is the seal of Muhammad is the seal of prophecy. There cannot be any more prophets after Muhammad, and anyone who says otherwise is going to be considered a heretic, definitely not a Muslim. And that's an important part that we'll talk to later when we talk about other religions that have came to that rose in the last 1,000 years or so. So Islam is basically thought of and brought up in what we call today Saudi Arabia, the cities of Mecca and Medina. This is where Muhammad was born. This is where he operated. This is where, even today, these are the two holiest cities for Islam. Mecca number 1, Medina number 2. And after the death of Muhammad, Islam starts to expand. And they're going to start conquering the lands all around them. And one of the areas that they're going to conquer in the 7th century is the land of Israel. Now, at this point, we're talking about Islam conquering it from the Christians. The Christians have been around here for about 300 years now. And as Islam conquers the land of Israel, Islam is going to start building mosques. In the 7th century, or more towards the 8th century, this is when we start seeing synagogues for the Jewish people. The Christians are going to have their churches and mosques for the Muslims. Everything is built, again, as we already said in prior podcasts, one on top of the other. The idea of a synagogue, a house of gathering, literally that's what it means, a house of gathering, Beit Knesset. Christianity will take this house of gathering, call it a church, and then Islam will take this house of gathering and call it a mosque. It's a place basically of worship nowadays. And Islam, instead of calling everybody with a bell like the Christians will do, they have a high tower and they call for prayer. And the Jews, we talked about this earlier, the Jews will have a high place at the Temple Mount area where they're going to blow the trumpet, for example. And Islam is ruling. But when they're ruling, since Muhammad is already dead, we already have fighting who's going to rule all of Islam. And that battle within Islam still continues today, mainly by what people call the Sunnis and the Shiites. Sunnis accepted the 4 leaders after Muhammad. They were acceptable by all, but who's going to be the next one? And the Shiites wanted a guy called Ali, and the Sunnis refused to accept Ali's power, and that's where the big split, which is still today the big split. So Iran is a Shiite country, while Saudi Arabia, modern day, is a Sunni country. And they are fighting it out since then, and they'll probably be continually fighting over the next who knows how long. So already in the 7th century, we have the split, or 8th century. And the Umayyad dynasty controls the land of Israel, and they don't control Mecca and Medina. This is a serious problem, because while Islam has the idea of pilgrimage, just like the Jewish people do, they don't come on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They come on a pilgrimage to Medina and to Mecca. And if you do it in the proper time, and you do the proper steps during that time that you're supposed to, you get this title called Hajj. With a lack of a chet in your English language, let's go with H-A-J, Hajj.
Okay.
This is a very important title in the Muslim world, an honorary title, nothing more than that, but a very, very important one. And the Umayyad dynasty that controls the land of Israel is thinking, well, if our faithful people leave our area of rule and they go to Mecca and Medina, it's not a 7-hour flight. You got to walk. That's a couple of months. You got to be there. That's another month. You got to come back. That's another couple of months. That's like 5 at least months that our faithful people are not going to be with us. Who's to say that they won't decide to stay, that they'll start paying taxes not to us? And even worse, what happens if the Christians take this opportunity and attack us and try to conquer this place? We need to keep them here. And in order to do that, we must create an alternative for especially Mecca, because that's the number one city there. And what they do when they get to Mecca on this Hajj, on this pilgrimage, they walk around the black stone called the Kaaba. This is a heavenly stone as far as Islam is concerned. This is a part of the house of Muhammad, which was built by Abraham. There's always a connection between Muhammad and Abraham. And that means that in order for there to be any kind of replacement system, we need to have a heavenly stone connected with Muhammad, connected with Abraham. that we can tell our faithful people, you don't need to go all the way to Mecca. We can do it somewhere else. And as we're starting to look around, we realize that we have the foundation stone. The foundation stone is right here in the land, well, not here, but in the land of Israel,
right.
where the temple used to be. It's still there. Now, we already mentioned this in other podcasts, but because Islam sees itself as a continuation of Judaism and Christianity, then everything holy to Jews is holy to Christians, holy to Islam. And once the Jewish people decided the foundation stone is a holy place, then automatically it becomes a holy place for Islam. So we have a heavenly stone. Is it connected with Abraham? Of course. Abraham took his son and was supposed to sacrifice him. Perfect match, because now we're going to say Abraham took his son Ishmael. We're going to divert a little bit from the Jewish text, and they explain this by saying, well, the Jews and the Christians had enough time to, alter the original name for religious, political reasons, whatever it is. The Quran tells it the way it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And in the Quran, you'll see this story again, where Abraham takes his son Ishmael and is supposed to sacrifice him, and it's going to be basically the same place, the foundation stone. Now we have a little bit of a problem, because we also have to connect this stone with Muhammad. Mm-hmm. And the name Jerusalem does not appear anywhere in the text of the Quran. So we have to improvise a little bit, and we go to chapter 17 in the Quran. It's called a surah, not chapter, Surah 17. And there it talks about a nocturnal journey that Muhammad takes from the holy shrine to the Al-Aqsa shrine. Everybody in the Muslim world agrees where the holy shrine is. Mecca. Absolutely. No question about it. What's Al-Aqsa? Where is Al-Aqsa? Good question. I'm glad you asked. The word Al-Aqsa literally means the last place, the farthest one away. And the Umayyad dynasty is going to take this vague word, and they're going to say the Temple Mount, the one that King Herod the Great built, ruins of it are still visible. This is Al-Aqsa. And since the foundation stone is in the center of the Temple Mount, then here we have this connection. And the story says that Muhammad goes from, as I said, the holy shrine to the Al-Aqsa shrine. And it continues to talk about the fact that he's going to pray to God. And after the prayer, he's going to ascend to the heavens. And he's going to debate with God about how many prayers the Muslim should have a day. We start with 500 prayers a day. That's a lot of prayers. Muhammad is a great negotiator. And he starts bringing God down. And he's about to quit the negotiations when suddenly Moses and Jesus are going to appear next to him. And they're going to help him negotiate God down all the way to 5. And since then, in Islam, they pray 5 times a day. Mm-hmm. The entire story of Surah 17 basically ends when Muhammad wakes back up in Mecca. And that was the end of the story. But now we've associated Muhammad and Abraham with this stone. And not only that, but now we have a great argument, and there is an argument within Islam in the 8th century literature, which is holier? The place where as a man he was born in Mecca, or the place where as a prophet he ascends to the heavens, and he's going to debate with God about how many prayers a day the Muslim should have. Today there's, by the way, no discussion about it. Mecca, Medina, number 1 and number 2. Jerusalem is the 3rd holiest site for Islam. And in order to commemorate the fact that Muhammad prays at Al-Aqsa and ascends to Al-Aqsa, they rebuild the Temple Mount. All the 4 huge retaining walls, they're going to rebuild them. Not exactly in the same style, but enough so that they can have a platform. And they're going to build 2 main buildings at the top. On the southern side, they're going to build a relatively small dome. And this is the place where he's going to pray to God. And then, where does he ascend to the heavens? He steps on the Jewish foundation stone. That's the connection. He ascends to the heavens, and they build this, there's no other way to describe it, a beautiful golden dome to commemorate the ascension of Muhammad and his debate with God about the events. Now, a few things about this. First of all, we're taking the Jewish text, we're taking the Christian text, and we're making it our own. Mm-hmm. Muhammad is not the first one to debate with God. We have the story of Abraham. Yeah. When he hears that the angels are on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy those wicked places, he's going to start a negotiation with God. Well, what if we find 50 righteous people? Are you really going to destroy all of them? What if we're missing 5 people? We can't get to 50, but we can get to 45.
Yeah.
And he continues until he finds, the number 10.
Yeah.
Okay, if we find 10 righteous people, not that they found it, but if we find 10 righteous people, then you're going to save Sodom and Gomorrah. So this idea of negotiating with God connects us again with the story of Abraham.
Yep.
Always a connection. And then we have the story in the New Testament,
Yep.
the transfiguration. And when Jesus transfigures in front of his disciples, it's Moses and Aaron, one representing the law, one representing the prophecy, but they are going to be on the side of Jesus.
Yeah. Moses and Elijah.
Yes, Moses and Elijah next
law
to
and prophets.
Yes, exactly.
And now you have Moses.
Now we're taking Moses and Jesus next to Muhammad,
which elevates Muhammad.
Absolutely.
They're borrowing from the story.
We are always building one on top of the next religion. It has to be that way.
Yeah.
So when the Muslims say that Muhammad ascended to the heavens from that specific, it has to be that specific spot. It has to be the place where Abraham took his son. It has to be the foundation stone. Otherwise, that connection is lost on them. And therefore, they accept those stories. Yes, this is the foundation stone. Yes, I'm talking theological level, not political level. This is the place where Abraham took his son. This is the place where the first temple of the Jewish people was and the second temple was. But more importantly than all of that, what we want to commemorate in the Muslim world is the ascension of Muhammad to the heavens. And that's why they build that golden dome on that specific spot.
Yeah, so, and for our listeners, this is something that you see not only when you go to Israel, but any pictures.
Yes.
That you're going to see of the Temple Mount.
Absolutely.
You're not going to see the temple.
No.
You're going to see
that's gone.
The Dome of the Rock.
Yes.
That's what you're going to see. As well as the second, I mean, you can sometimes see that depending on how the picture is.
Sure.
Where you're going
There's
to actually,
reconstructions, and nowadays with computers, computer regeneration of the temple itself. And one of the amazing things is you're thinking, well, the Dome of the Rock is this great building. Beautiful. It's about 80 feet, 85 feet high. The temple that King Herod built was almost twice the building of the Dome of the Rock, and we're talking 700 years before the Muslims built that building.
Right. Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Goes back to the magnificence that we talked about
King Herod the Great.
But that's where a lot of the tension, not to fast forward to modern day yet, but a lot of the tension still exists because you have Christians who this is holy to them.
Yes.
The Jewish people, obviously very holy to them. And now you have this holy site for Muslims. And so one of the reasons I tell people that in Jerusalem, and especially when we're in the old city, I always feel safe. Now, there can always be a rogue person over anywhere, and we understand that. But because this is a holy site for 3 different groups of people that even if they're fighting, this is holy to all of them.
Absolutely.
Now, they may be fighting over who should have that spot, but the actual fighting. And so within the old city, you actually have these different groups and these different quarters. And it's just fascinating for people who haven't been there. Once you go there, to just realize this one spot is the holiest or one of the holiest. In all 3 major monotheistic religions. And I know we touched on that before, but and so by this time period in history, you built one on another. The stories are building. You got to change some things for it to fit. Can't be Isaac, it's got to be Ishmael. How did Muhammad get? I mean, they've got to fit it together. But once they fit that narrative together, ever since then, it's been a holy site for the Muslims, as it has been for Christians.
Goes back to what I said before. Once you make a place holy, you cannot unholy it.
Yeah,
that's
always going to be holy.
Always.
Right. Fascinating. Where do we go next?
All right. So since this is an overview, we're not going to go deep into these time periods. The Muslims are going to rule for the next 400 years. And in the end of the 11th century, we have the Christian Crusades from Europe making their way. They want to free the holy sites for Christianity from infidel Muslim hands. Unfortunately, along the way, they meet their old rivals, the Jews, and they massacre them as well. It's not a very pretty sight. And they managed to conquer the land of Israel, all of it. Around 1099, they conquer the city of Jerusalem. They appoint Baldwin I as the Crusader nation king that they've now established, and they're now ruling from Jerusalem. Not very long-lived. It doesn't take very long. The Muslims regroup attack again. And towards the end of the 12th century, the Christians lose. The Muslims retake control of the land of Israel. Doesn't take very long again, and we have like a ping pong battle here between the Christians and the Muslims. The Christians regroup, return to the land of Israel, but this time they don't conquer everything. Jerusalem is not amongst the areas that they conquer. They actually only control the northern part of the land of Israel, but we still have Crusader rule over at least parts of the land of Israel. And these battles are going to continue throughout the 13th century until Islam defeats the Christians in I guess it's the end of the 13th century. And from that point on, Israel is kind of lost to the Europeans. And for the next almost 700 consecutive years, there is some kind of Muslim rule over the land of Israel. It changes hand. We have different entities called Seljuks, and then the Ottomans come along. And the Ottomans rule the land of Israel basically for 400 years until the end of World War I. And this is a big stretch. Now, the way that the Ottomans rule is very interesting. They have a huge empire, one of the largest empires ever. And they control modern-day Egypt and Israel and Jordan and Syria and Iraq and Turkey, of course. Probably forgetting a few of the countries in between, but that's okay. And they had governors over each region. They would do census to know how much taxes everybody needs to pay. And that governor needs to pay Istanbul, the capital. They need to send that money over there. And there was a census in the 19th century, the beginning of the 19th century. And the land, or the region called Palestine, a part of the Ottoman Empire, had less than 250,000 people in it. This is a place that is abandoned, deserted, 250,000, and they even broke it down in terms of population makeup. And believe it or not, the majority of the people at the beginning of the 19th century are Christians living in the land of Palestine. In second place, in terms of numbers in population, were the Jews, and there were a handful of Muslims at the beginning of the 19th century. This is shocking, because when you look at things today, it's obviously very different, and let's see if we can understand what's going on here. Now, if you're a Ottoman citizen, you can walk from region to region, and if I go from, let's say, Egypt into Palestine, I just pay taxes to the Palestine region governor, and he sends that money to Istanbul. So the more people you have in your area, it's probably easier for you to collect the amount of taxes that you're supposed to collect, and the governors are supposed to make an incentive for you to come to their area, migrate, right? And nothing is going on really the first couple of decades in the 19th century, but then things are changing. In the fourth decade, and let's call it 1831, the Ottoman Empire is about to go bankrupt. Financially, we're talking about. They need money, and they need it quickly. What do? We change a very old law within the Muslim world that doesn't allow Muslims to sell Muslim-owned land to non-Muslims. Okay, so if I'm a Muslim and I own land, I am not allowed to sell that land to anyone who's not a Muslim. This changes. And the European powers jump on the opportunity. Suddenly, France, England, the Latin Patriarchate, Italy, Greece, they all start purchasing land in the land of Israel. Ottomans are very happy. Money, cash is coming in. And this is kind of reigniting the fire in Christian Europe to come to Israel. And we start seeing a movement of pilgrims, not people who are coming to live in Israel, but pilgrims. And as these pilgrims are coming, they look for the Greek flag if they're from Greece. And the Greeks are going to purchase the area in Jaffa where they're going to get in on the boat. And then when we see the Greek flag and we're from Greece, we understand there's somebody there that knows our culture, that maybe speaks our language. Maybe he'll provide us with a tour guide. And then, a couple of nights you stay in Jaffa, you start making your way to Jerusalem. You walk or you rent a donkey or whatever it is that you did back in those days. And then when you get to Jerusalem, you look for the Greek flag, the Italian flag, whatever it is, the area that these guys purchased. And tourism picks up. Now, when you have tourism, the economy starts to grow. And Muslims from the surrounding area start making their way into Israel to work in Palestine because there's tourism. We need guides. We need taxi services, camel riders, whatever. We need souvenir sellers, right? We need attractions. So we're having an influx of Muslims coming into the land. 1839, the Messiah is coming. This is huge news. Different Jewish communities with different methods, without, internet connecting between them. So they had no idea that the others are doing the same thing. Come to the realization that 1839 is the year of the Messiah. And in preparation for the coming of the Messiah, we're moving to Israel. We're moving to Palestine. 19th century, it's still called Palestine. We're moving into Palestine. And there's this religious movement of religious Jews coming to the land, preparing to greet the Messiah, say hello, and have some fun with it. Guess what didn't happen in 1839?
Messiah didn't come.
Didn't come. Huge disappointment, but a lot of the people that moved to Palestine remained there. Probably one of the most important aspects of the 19th century happens in the 1850s. The Ottoman Empire decides that they want to connect Mecca and Medina with Istanbul using a railroad. What's the center of that track? The land of Israel, Palestine. And I'm talking about the first stations of train were from Jerusalem to Jaffa or something like that. We're talking the 19th century. The first railroad tracks are being built in the land of Palestine. Again, Muslims from all the surrounding areas start making their way into the land in order to build a railroad. There's job opportunities. And then at the end of the 19th century, we have a huge movement of the different nations. Everybody wants independence. Everybody wants, the French want a French country, and the Germans want a German country, and the Italians an Italian country, and we have this rise of nations, and the Jewish people wanted a state of their own. And we call this the Zionist movement. And suddenly, the Jewish, not necessarily religious people, are showing interest again in the land, in Palestine. Because if we're going to have a state for the Jewish people, it may as well be the promised land, right? Not to mention that when we're talking also to the religious people about the idea of a Jewish state, they're saying, if there's going to be one, it has to be the land of Israel. Uganda was on the table, by the way. One of the leaders of the Jewish people offered Uganda as a place that the Jews can maybe purchase from the British, I think, were controlling that area. And he was actually starting to talk to the different leaders of Europe about a Jewish state, not necessarily in Israel or Palestine, but in another place. But it went very quickly off the table. And we're seeing waves of Jews making their way into the land. And they are going to start drying the swamps, and they're going to start building institutions, and they're going to start living in the deserts, in the most horrific places that you can think of, where nobody thought of to live. We're building. Who's going to come and help us build? Muslims from the surrounding Ottoman Empire, who have no problem going from one region to another, are making their way, and they are starting to find jobs helping the Jewish people build roads, build institutions, and all these other things. And at the end of the 19th century, the entire population makeup of the land completely changes. From being a minority, now the Muslims are a majority. The Jewish people came in, whether it was the religious movement in the 1830s or whether it was later on towards the end with the non-religious movement necessarily. So they kind of stayed in terms of makeup of the population in second place. Christians only came here as pilgrims. You stay here a week, you stay here a month, 2 months, you go back to Europe. So the Christian population that was a majority at the beginning of the 19th century now becomes a minority at the end of the 19th century. A complete changeover, and this is how the 20th century begins. With a majority of Muslims in the land here, still called Palestine. Jews trying to build a state, working to build a state, not just working on the ground, building and drying swamps, but also politically. They're all around. We have Jewish leaders, we have conventions in Europe talking and trying to convince the world that there should be a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And the Ottomans, by the way, don't seem to be against it at this stage. They're still in control of the land, and everything is going to take pause. Why? Because in 1914 we have World War I begins. And this is a wonderful place to, I think, end our little...
Take our own pause.
Yes, take our own pause.
Yeah, so we'll pick up a couple things, I think, just to wrap this up, Opher, is you mentioned earlier, we talked about how these places, they might be a synagogue and then they turn into a church, or they might be, in fact, even pagan temples then turned into churches. But then a church might turn into a mosque. And one of the things that I've had a privilege to see, and it is in Istanbul, is the Hagia Sophia. And that's exactly what happens, back and forth and back and forth. Always holy, just depends on at that time
who's controlling it.
Who's controlling it? Who's it holy for or holy to? So it is fascinating how that happens. Another thing is, you bring up the period of the Crusaders, and it's one of those things that I know is Christians that we tend to kind of frown on historically, because while they're doing things in the name of Christ, we're saying
not very Christly,
not very Christ-like that you're doing. But I think that should give maybe all of our listeners a pause to realize that when we're talking about a world religion, whether that's Judaism, Islam, Christianity, when we're talking about a world group, Jews, Muslims, Christians, we always need to keep in mind that that doesn't represent everyone in that group. And we're going to see that when we come back full circle in future episodes to the time of Christ and to the Jewish people. And we're going to find out it's a very, very small group of people that are really frustrated with Jesus at the temple.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about who that is. It's not the Jewish people. You can't just lump an entire group of people together.
The multitudes were listening to his teachings, and they were honoring him and calling him Hosanna, Hosanna.
Absolutely. And that's where I think, so as Christians, I think we understand it from a standpoint of, I don't want to be labeled with the Crusader, period. There's a group not too far from where we're recording this that calls themselves Christians. They're a group that makes national news a lot, but not for anything that we would say represents Christ. And I think it's just a good takeaway that, there are people who are Muslim, there are people who are Jewish, people who are Christians, and just because another group that shares that, we'll call it maybe overall belief system, even though that doesn't necessarily mean the behavior
I like the fact
lines
that
up.
you didn't use my name on this one.
Yeah. We just have to be cautious and careful with that. I think that's one of the things that tends to create more division than it does actually unity. But I think one of the greatest examples for Christians is the Crusade period, Crusaders. But one of the examples we need to remember, we'll come back to in the future, is definitely around the crucifixion of Christ, where it does bother me when people kind of broad stroke it and say the Jews killed Jesus. And it's like, nah, let's look historically. Which was a very common
perspective, unfortunately, which brought
and carried
a lot
on
of anti-Semitism.
A lot of anti-Semitism. And that's what happens when, honestly, if you just go back to the Bible and you understand that, and you put that in, couple it with history, that's just not accurate.
I can't wait to get to those.
So we'll get there, though.
Yes.
But before that, we're going to have to finish our overview of Israel with our Opher view of Israel. And before that, I just want to, again, our sponsor, we want to thank CHLS, the Center for Holy Land Studies, or thechls.org.
Did you notice that my shirt actually says that?
Yeah, and we're matching, different colors, but matching shirts. And we are so appreciative of what they do to bring people to the land of the Bible. So check them out. And check us back out in March, as we will be in episode number 9.
Amazing.
Of our overview of Israel. And obviously we're now in the 20th century, so we'll get to the modern era fairly quickly, but we're on our way there, and we appreciate you joining us, and we have lots more content in store. I think it's safe to say, Opher, we definitely have enough content for season 2.
Absolutely.
But let's get through season 1 first. We'll see you episode 9 in March, and join us again. We'll talk to you then.
See you soon.